Captain Ethan suddenly heard loud thuds on the Airbus A320's windows. He didn't know what was happening. He looked around in panic. Just then, First Officer Ryan gasped after the cabin crew warned him. Captain Ethan was shocked to hear that a huge group of birds was chasing and hitting the plane, and they weren't stopping. This could turn into a big disaster. Captain Ethan tried to get away from the birds, but he had to be very careful. If they hit the engines, the whole plane could fall. The more he tried to escape, the angrier the birds seemed to get. He didn't know why, but it just kept getting worse. The birds wouldn't leave the plane alone. The cabin crew said the passengers were getting scared and loud. They thought the birds might make the plane crash. Captain Ethan told the passengers not to worry. He said everything was under control and this was normal. But he had to call air traffic control to ask what he should do. He felt like it was only a matter of time before the birds could actually make the plane crash. More and more birds kept coming, and they got even angrier. But there was a big problem. First Officer Ryan turned around, looking worried. Captain Ethan could tell it was bad news. He couldn't reach air traffic control. No one was answering. Captain Ethan told him to keep trying. Then he told flight attendant Olivia, who had to help calm down the scared passengers. The passengers could barely see out of the windows because the birds covered them completely. The whole plane became dark, which made everything feel even scarier. The passengers got really frightened. Some of them were so scared that they started crying. Captain Ethan used all his strength to make the plane go higher to escape the birds. But if he went up too fast, it could put everyone in danger. The problem was there were so many birds that they started pushing the plane down. First Officer Ryan gasped when he saw buildings getting closer. They were now flying very low over the city, and it was really dangerous. Luckily, Captain Ethan was able to steer the plane toward the countryside. He knew trying to go higher was useless. He had to get back to the international airport and land the plane. Meanwhile, flight attendant Olivia was trying to handle the passengers. Some people had even gotten out of their seats because they couldn't take it anymore. Others just sat there, too scared to move. No one knew what was going to happen. At last, First Officer Ryan got a call telling them to turn the plane right away and land at the nearest airport. Air traffic control told them to go to a smaller airport that was closer. Captain Ethan didn't waste a second and turned the plane. But now things were getting even more dangerous. When they turned, they hit some birds, which made them even angrier. The birds kept crashing into the plane, and small cracks started to appear in the windows. Captain Ethan was told that emergency teams were already on their way to the landing strip, but first he had to make sure the plane could get there safely. Only then could they get help. He did everything he could to keep the plane from crashing, but as they reached the countryside, things got even worse. As soon as they left the city, Captain Ethan saw that the last part of the landing would be even harder. More birds flew out from the nearby forest and rushed toward the plane. He had a bad feeling. This could end in disaster. The more birds hit the plane, the closer they got to the engines. If too many went inside, it would be really bad. Captain Ethan stayed focused on reaching the landing strip, when suddenly, bang, a loud noise shook the whole plane. He could barely control it. The plane started dropping lower and lower. The passengers felt it too and began screaming in fear. The worst thing had happened. The engine had exploded. Captain Ethan's heart was beating fast. He was so focused that he couldn't hear anything else. The plane was falling from the sky. There was only one thing he could do. This was his last chance. He had to make an emergency landing. He had never done this before, only in practice during his training. But now it was real. He knew it was his job to make sure everyone on the plane stayed safe. As the plane dropped lower, Captain Ethan saw something in the distance, a large body of water. He quickly figured out that he might just be able to land there. This was their only chance. Landing on the ground would be too dangerous and could destroy the plane. With great effort, Captain Ethan managed to land the plane in the water. It wasn't a smooth landing, but at least the plane stayed in one piece. Now his biggest worry was making sure his crew and all the passengers were safe. Then Captain Ethan heard screaming. The passengers were terrified. For a moment he felt stuck, but he managed to get out of his seat. First Officer Ryan was barely awake, but with Captain Ethan's help, they got inside the plane. The crew tried to stay calm, and luckily, everyone seemed okay. They had to open the emergency exits, but there was a problem. The birds were still flying all around the plane. They couldn't stay inside. They had to get out. Captain Ethan tried to push one of the exits open, but it wouldn't budge. He started feeling worried and upset, but then one of the stewardesses managed to open another exit. The plane was sinking slowly, but they had just enough time to get everyone out safely. The crew tried to calm everyone down, but some people didn't listen. They only cared about saving themselves and rushed to get out first. But as soon as they stepped outside, the birds attacked them. Luckily, when most people jumped into the water, the birds left them alone. Some birds even flew inside the plane, but they didn't attack randomly. Instead, they seemed focused on the baggage area. What was in there? Captain Ethan was the last one to jump into the water. Luckily, the Coast Guard was already coming to rescue everyone. When he looked up, he saw the birds flying in circles above the plane. It was strange. The Coast Guard helped everyone out of the water safely, and more boats arrived to make sure no one was left behind. But the birds didn't leave. They kept circling the plane, as if they were looking for something inside. Captain Ethan was confused. He had no idea why the birds were acting like this. But things got even worse when the Coast Guard tried to get closer to the plane. The birds suddenly became even more alert. It was like they didn't want anyone near the wreck. But the Coast Guard didn't give up. Even though Captain Ethan warned them, they kept going. The moment they got close, the birds attacked. The crew on the Coast Guard's boat got so scared that some of them jumped into the water and swam back to the other boats. Everyone, including the passengers and cabin crew, was shocked. What was inside the plane? Why were the birds so aggressive? They had to find a way to scare the birds away. If they didn't, they would never be able to get close and take the plane out of the water to inspect it. They needed a plan, fast. Big tugboats were already on their way to pull the plane out of the water, but the Coast Guard warned them about the huge swarm of birds. Just like before, the workers weren't too worried about the birds until they got closer. As the boats moved forward, the birds started swarming again. The sky became dark with so many birds flying together. This was a clear sign that they needed to wait. The workers quickly called for backup to help scare the birds away. It was the only way to get closer. This time, the birds attacked even earlier. They didn't wait for the boats to get close. Instead, they swarmed the ships from far away. The crew standing outside got covered by birds. Luckily, they rushed inside the ship just in time. The tugboats kept moving forward because the birds couldn't reach the captains inside. Then Captain Ethan had an idea. He remembered that airports use loud sounds to scare birds away. He told the Coast Guard about this plan. They acted fast and played loud, high-pitched sounds through their speakers. The plan worked. The birds got scared and flew back into the forest. The Coast Guard knew that if they stopped now, the birds would come back. This was their chance to get the plane out of the water. Under the Coast Guard's direction, the tugboats attached their cables to the plane and started pulling. Luckily, the plane was easy to move. Soon they would be able to search inside. Meanwhile, the police arrived. Since Captain Ethan was in charge of the plane, they asked him questions right away. He had nothing to hide, so he told them everything. It was just a normal flight. He had flown this route almost every week without any problems, until today. Then he mentioned something strange. When the birds got inside the plane, they went straight for the luggage room. That could be the clue to solving this mystery. The police asked more questions about the luggage, but Captain Ethan didn't have the answers. He told them to ask the passengers. They might know something. All of the passengers, even though they were very scared, answered the police's questions about what they had in their luggage. But there was one man who acted differently. The police set him aside because he seemed suspicious. Every time he talked, he kept changing his story. Nothing he said made sense. The police found this very strange. When they asked about his luggage, he refused to answer. So they decided to check his background. That's when things got even more confusing. His passport was fake. This was a big problem. The only way to find out who he really was by taking his fingerprints. When they checked the database, they found a match. This man was a convicted criminal who had just been released from prison. His records were sealed by the government, so no one knew exactly what he had done. Now the big question was, what was he carrying in his luggage? And why did the birds react to it? The police had to find out. Finally, the plane was pulled out of the water. A special team arrived to carefully search it, but before they could even step inside, they heard strange noises. The birds had noticed that the ships had sailed away, and the loud sounds were now far off. Right away, they swarmed the plane again. The police thought the birds were trying to get into the luggage area. The research team quickly moved closer to the speakers and turned them on. The loud sounds scared the birds away again, and the team entered the plane. But getting to the luggage room wasn't easy. The plane was badly damaged, and the door was jammed shut. Using special tools, they broke the door open. As soon as they got inside, they heard strange noises coming from the luggage area. They carefully moved closer and found the exact suitcases the sounds were coming from. Right away, they called the police and told them to arrest the suspicious passenger. The name on the suitcase matched the fake name he had used when checking in. The research team carefully took the suitcases out of the plane. Captain Ethan ran toward them and turned pale when he saw what was inside. The man had been smuggling exotic birds. The police called for more law enforcement to get all the details. It turned out that this man had been arrested before for smuggling rare animals, but after getting out of jail, he started doing it again. This time, he was in big trouble. He was charged and would never be released again. He also got in trouble for putting the passengers in danger. The wild birds had attacked the plane because they heard the trapped birds crying for help. Captain Ethan went to the man's trial. When it was over, he felt so relieved that he burst into tears.